A criação de uma criança é responsabilidade dos pais. Na nossa cultura contemporânea, muitas vezes são só os pais, mas outras culturas têm outras formas de atribuir essa responsabilidade em que mais gente participa da criação das crianças. Nosso convidado de hoje é o psiquiatra Joshua Sparrow. Ele é diretor do Centro Brazelton Touchpoints, na divisão de Medicina do Desenvolvimento do Hospital das Crianças, em Boston, nos Estados Unidos. Joshua veio ao Brasil graças à Comissão de Valorização da Primeira Infância e Cultura da Paz. Ele conversa conosco aqui no Cidadania sobre o papel dos pais na educação, conhecido como parentalidade. Olá, hello, Joshua. Thank you for coming and participating in Cidadania. Muito obrigada por participar aqui do programa Cidadania. Conta um pouco para a gente da sua experiência com outras culturas sobre a parentalidade, o papel dos pais na criação das crianças.
Maybe I should start by telling you about my own family, in which we have several cultures, because that is where I first started learning about the cultural differences in how we think about who a child is, what a child needs to grow and develop, and what parents' roles are. So in my family, my wife is French, and we raised our children together without understanding until they were born the differences between the American culture and the French culture with regard to who a child is, what expectations are thought to be appropriate for a child, and what a parent's role is. And I think this is common for multicultural families when a man and a woman are first getting to know each other and dating. They usually don't talk about their own experiences of being raised with their parents. You don't talk, for example, about whether or not your parents spanked you. That typically isn't what you talk about when you're first going out. So it comes as a surprise once you have children together to discover all of these differences, all of which are rooted in the different cultural beliefs about how to raise a child.
Então, algumas vezes, um dos pais acredita na palmada e o outro já é completamente contra.
For example, or another difference would simply be family meal times. In the French culture, a family meal is a time where children are expected to come to the table at the same time as everybody else, to sit still, to eat politely, and to participate in the conversation without dominating it.
E ainda de comer a mesma comida que os adultos estão comendo, né?
And in American culture, recently a survey showed that most families do not even have shared family meals. So this is a very important cultural difference.
Já que falamos sobre alimentação, eu sei que o senhor tem um livro especialmente sobre alimentação das crianças, né?
Right, it's called Feeding Your Child the Brazelton Way, and it focuses on the challenges and delights of nurturing children from birth, and actually it starts during pregnancy through roughly age 6. And what we do in that book, as well as in the books we've written about sleep and about toilet training and about fighting between siblings and several other books, is to talk about the predictable moments in development which are challenging for the child and challenging for the parents. So in the feeding book, one of the first challenges is actually during pregnancy, when a mother begins to think about whether or not she will breastfeed her baby or use a bottle. And in the United States, which is a far less civilized country than Brazil, we have no paid leave for mothers or fathers. The law says 3 months, but without pay, only 3 months. So many mothers during the last trimester of pregnancy ask themselves, well, do I really want to breastfeed my baby if I'm going to have to go back to work so soon and I'll have to pump? So that's one of the first predictable challenges. Another predictable challenge in the baby's development happens between 4 and 5 months of age. And very often at that age, babies who've been doing a very good job of feeding will suddenly lose interest. They might suck once or twice, then they'll pull away from the breast or the bottle, and they'll look all around the room and completely lose interest in feeding. So mothers always call up their doctors to say, something's wrong with my baby. She's not interested in eating anymore. Is it my milk? Do I not have enough? Is there something wrong with my milk? Is there something wrong with me? But there's nothing wrong with the mother, and there's nothing wrong with the baby. What happens between 4 and 5 months is that the baby's visual capacity develops. At 4 months, up until 4 months, the baby focuses best at about this distance. So when the baby is being held at the breast or with a bottle, the best thing for the baby to see and focus on is the parent's face, because that's what is in the best focus. But between 4 and 5 months, the eyes are able to focus much further out, so they might want to look at you or a few meters away from the mother or the father's face. So suddenly, there are all of these new things for them to see that they can see clearly between 4 and 5 months that they never could see except in a blur before. So they're really just doing their job, which is to get to know their environment as fast as they can so that they can make their way in it. And there is a solution for this predictable challenge. Can you guess what it is?
Ir para lugar fechado, que não tenha tanta distração.
Yeah, or you turn off the lights, and then the baby will not be distracted and will continue to feed. So we call these difficult, predictable moments of development touch points. And it has always been a challenge to translate that word touch points into any other language, including Portuguese. But what it means is a predictable moment in time where the baby's behavior goes backwards, falls apart temporarily, so that a new skill moving forward the child's development can emerge. And because this predictable period in development disorganizes the baby, guess who else becomes disorganized? The pais, yeah, the parents, and also everybody else who cares about that baby. So touch points means a point in time to touch into the family system for the additional supports that everybody needs to move through these challenging times of development.
A forma de lidar com esses touch points pode ter desdobramentos futuros, por exemplo, nesse caso da alimentação, dependendo de como se trabalha isso. A criança pode, no futuro, ter algum distúrbio alimentar?
It's a perfect question. That's the reason why we became so interested in understanding development in this way. Because, for example, again, at this age, 4 or 5 months, when the baby stops eating, if a mother doesn't know to expect that, and her doctor can actually tell her in advance, don't worry, at this age your baby will lose interest, just find a quiet, dark place to feed her, and it will be okay. It's not a problem with your milk. But if no one gives the mother this information, she doubts herself, she worries that there's something wrong with her, and that feels terrible. So she might become depressed, and when a mother is depressed, that can influence the baby's development. And she might become anxious that the baby won't survive, because parents know that one of their most important jobs is to keep their baby alive, and feeding the baby is right up there at the top of the list of the responsibilities for parents. So one of the big risks at this age is forcing the baby to feed. And forcing the baby to feed never works, never works. It makes the baby fight feeding even more. And then you can get an early eating disorder where the baby stops eating altogether. So it can be very serious. And this is just one example among many other examples where the way that parents respond to this predictable, temporary falling apart of behavior in development can lead to a derailment, to going off track, when if parents know it's coming and they have the support they need from their family, from their doctors, and from the child care providers or early education teachers, they can move forward with a child's development. The one other thing to say is things can also go wrong because of the stress on parents. Between 9 and 13 months, there's another touch point which is completely predictable. Between 9 and 13 months, guess what part of a child's development falls apart and goes off track? Your children must be older.
Trying to think back.
You try to think back.
Mobility, I don't know.
Right, well, mobility, yes, exactly, mobility. So between 9 and 13 months, babies who had started sleeping most of the way or all the way through the night suddenly start waking up again 3 or 4 times every night. The sleep cycle lasts 3 hours, then they wake up, but they can't get themselves back down to sleep again. And so they wake up the parents. So the parents are exhausted. And the reason why this happens between 9 and 13 months is just as you say, because they're getting ready to take their first step. So during 9 and 13 months, babies spend more time in light sleep and less time in deep sleep than any other time during early childhood. Because it's in light sleep that their brains are remembering, because memory and learning happens during sleep. Their brains are remembering how to put together their movements to take the first step. So of course they're awake more, and of course the parents are exhausted. So there's more stress on parents. We don't have a good little trick like we do for the 4-month-old touch point for this one, but we certainly know parents need more support, more help, and more understanding and kindness because they're exhausted with their babies getting up 3 or 4 times every night.
E as diferentes culturas tradicionais, elas têm uma outra forma de lidar com esses momentos, esses touch points.
You know, people have been raising children for a very long time. And for most of human history, in most places around the world, we have never raised children in a nuclear family with just a mother and just a father, or now in the United States, maybe 2 mothers or 2 fathers. It's always taken a village. In fact, I was talking with a Native American colleague of mine last week, and she was telling me that her granddaughter says, I have many grandmothers, not just 2. I have 6 or 7 grandmothers. And when she went to school and talked about her grandmothers, the teacher, who was not Native American, said, you only have 2 grandmothers. But this little girl was so happy that she had many grandmothers because it made her feel reassured that there was a lot of support around her, so many people to count on, and so many people who cared deeply about her. One example of a major cultural difference is in the touch point that happens between 3 weeks and 12 weeks. So at 3 weeks of age, most babies start crying for no reason that we know of, for up to 3 hours a day, at least 3 days a week. Usually it's at the end of the day. So we used to call this colic, now we call it end of the day unexplained fussing. And it can drive parents crazy. And in fact, it increases the risk of abuse because it is so stressful. So if a parent is alone and may already have postpartum depression and doesn't have other relatives to support, and this of course is a greater risk in our nuclear families than in a community raising children together, then the risk of abuse may be greater because the parent is all alone trying to get through those hours every day when the baby is crying, and really nothing calms the baby down for very long. It peaks at 8 weeks of age and subsides by about 12 weeks of age. But in Guatemala, for example, where babies are always up against their mother's body in a serape, in a piece of cloth that holds them, the mothers traditionally, and this is also true in southern Mexico and Chiapas among traditional cultures, the mothers feel the baby's distress, and as soon as they feel the baby's stress, they put the baby to breast, even if the baby's not hungry, but just because the baby's fussing. And in one study that Brazelton did, he counted that the mother put the baby to breast 80 80 times a day. And there was no fussing, no colic, and there was much less depression in the mothers. So this is a good example of how different cultures find their way through these predictable developmental crises, although I imagine many mothers might think that that could be very exhausting. I think these mothers may have been relieved that they didn't have to deal with the 3 hours a day of fussing every day.
E é interessante que o senhor fala, então, que não se chama mais de cólica. Quando a gente fala cólica, a gente imagina que tem alguma coisa digestiva, intestinal, então não é mais, não existe essa associação.
It used to be called colic because it was thought that all babies were having trouble with their digestion. Now there's a very small subset of babies who are having trouble with their digestive system because it is immature, and some of them will turn out to be sensitive to what they're being fed. But the vast majority of babies who are fussy between 3 weeks and 12 weeks do not have digestive problems. And we think that what is happening is a kind of integration of their neurosystem, which allows them to handle better all of the stimulation of their environment. And that's why during this period, when we try to calm them by singing to them or rocking them or dancing with them or shaking them or putting them in a baby chair on top of the washing machine or pushing them in the stroller very fast, all of these movements will make them stop crying for the moment. But as soon as you stop, they start crying even louder and probably for longer. Because although that kind of sensory stimulation will stop the crying, they can't really handle a lot of it, and it overwhelms them. So one theory now is that in this period, there's a process of integrating their ability to take in sensory stimulus that is not mature enough yet to handle it. And they're protesting at the end of the day. They're saying, it's too much, I can't handle it. So what we say is, when the baby starts crying, check and make sure she's not wet, doesn't have a dirty diaper, make sure she's not thirsty or hungry or tired. Try to soothe her a little bit, but don't too much, because it may just wear her out if you do too much, and she may then cry for longer.
O senhor é psiquiatra e trabalha muito com a medicina preventiva. É possível, né, nesses primeiros momentos em que a criança está crescendo, prevenir um problema psiquiátrico no futuro?
It certainly is, and that's actually why I began to work with families during pregnancy and in the first days and weeks and months of life. Before that, I worked on an inpatient child psychiatric unit at Boston Children's Hospital where we would hospitalize children, sometimes for a week, sometimes for several months. And after seeing 2,000 or 3,000 children, many of whom had been physically or sexually abused, I felt like I wasn't part of the solution because it was too late. And if I wasn't part of the solution, I was part of the problem. And there's a proverb about the man who was standing by the river and saw babies drowning in the river and pulled one baby out after another and eventually realized he needed to go upstream to stop the babies from being thrown in. So that's really the work that we can do during pregnancy and in the first weeks, months, and years. One of the big differences is that we don't just treat a single person, which is also a very culturally limited idea. It's a Euro-American idea, but it is not one that most cultures entertained for most of history. We don't treat just the baby or just the father or just the mother. The unit for treatment is the relationship, or the relationships between the mother and father, between the mother or father and the baby, the relationships in the family. So we focus on the relationship. The other big difference is, for a long time it was thought that babies were all born the same. Blank slates, pages that you could write on, balls of clay that you could shape. And therefore it was thought that whatever happened to a baby was the fault of the mother and father. And so psychiatry and pediatrics have devoted many, many years being wrong and blaming parents. When every baby, and this comes from the research that Barry Brazelton did, looking at brand new babies in the first hours of life, every baby is born a unique individual. And their behavior at birth is shaped by the experiences they had during pregnancy. And in fact, the genes that are expressed, to some extent, are affected by the experiences that babies had before they were born. So babies come into the world ready for the environment that they're being born into, and ready to act on their mother and father and other caregivers to actually shape their behavior. So it goes both ways. Yes, mothers and fathers shape babies' behavior, but babies actually shape mothers' and fathers' behavior too. So we can see at birth, for example, if during pregnancy the placenta was providing insufficient nutrients to the fetus, sometimes the babies are born what we call small for gestational dates. They're not fully mature. We can see that at birth if we know to look for it. Those babies are irritable, they fuss more, they're harder to soothe, they're less responsive to a parent's efforts to console them. So those babies' mothers are more at risk of postpartum depression. But if we can notice that difference in the baby at birth, and talk with the mother about the challenges that this baby brings and help her see it's not her fault. This baby will need special techniques to comfort and soothe. Then the mother can experience the mastery she will need to be protected from postpartum depression and to be the best mother she can be. That's just one example among others.
Muitos distúrbios psiquiátricos e mentais acontecem na fase da adolescência, da puberdade, que é quando eles aparecem. Já está muito tarde para trabalhar quando chega nessa idade?
No, it's not too late. So the orders that most commonly first appear in adolescence are, sadly, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and substance use. You will never find, or hardly ever find, an adult with a problem with alcohol or problem with drugs who did not begin during adolescence. So it is not too late. The importance of starting long before this work in the relationship between the mother and father and the baby is that it's the strong relationships that provide protection to the family, not so that there won't ever be schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or substance use problems, because there still will be, but so that the family and the child are better prepared to work together to get the treatment and to make the treatment work effectively. But the fact that those disorders appear most commonly in adolescence is because adolescence, like the first years of life, to a lesser extent, is a time of great changes in the brain. And in particular, in adolescence, the changes in the brain are evolutionarily set up to prompt the adolescent to seek novelty, to take risks, and to experiment, because adolescents are in a larger world now, and they need to learn about that world just the way the 4-month-old needs to be able to see more to understand her world. So there are risks in adolescence also that are the result of the way nature designed brain development to prepare adolescents for adulthood.
Tem se avançado muito na genética, mas como o senhor já disse, o que está o que se expressa, os genes que se expressam tem a ver também com o ambiente, não é uma coisa pré-determinada.
Right. So there are some psychiatric conditions that are known or thought to be affected by the genes that we inherit from our parents. Most of them do not yet have a single gene, so it is very hard to be able to predict by looking at genes who will get what psychiatric disorder. Many are predicted by a complex combination of genes. So that's why, so far, although this may change, it is hard to use genetic studies to predict psychiatric disorders. But in a more general way, we can look at family histories to see that there may be a greater likelihood of the children developing a psychiatric disorder when there are a great number of people in the family. I should say, though, that one of the very sad, tragic things about the stigmatization of mental illness is that mental illnesses are the most common of all illnesses. And for example, worldwide, the illness with the biggest burden, even economically, is depression. And yet, at least in the United States, I'm not sure about Brazil, there is so much hesitation to talk openly about mental illness. I want to come back to your question about genetics and epigenetics to say that there are genes that are associated with a variety of illnesses, including psychiatric illnesses. And then there is epigenetics. And epigenetics is a more recent field, although it's several decades old now, that looks at the ways in which certain genes may be expressed or turned on and others may be turned off. And that's where the connection between genes and the environment happens. So depending on the environment and experiences that one has, certain genes may be activated and others may be extinguished. So for example, there is research that says that one gene increases the risk for depression, but only if it is turned on during early childhood by a high number of traumatic experiences. But in an environment where there is protection from enormous amounts of trauma, that gene will not be turned on, and the risk for depression will be the same as for everybody else.
Infelizmente, nosso tempo acabou. Muito obrigada pela sua participação aqui no Cidadania. Thank you very much for coming here to Cidadania.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for inviting me.
Se você quiser rever, baixar ou repassar o link desse programa, é só acessar nossa página na internet, no endereço senado.leg.br/TV, ou então o canal da TV Senado no YouTube. Para fazer algum comentário, crítica ou sugestão, telefone de graça para 0800 61 2211. Obrigada pela atenção e até o próximo Cidadania.